Welcome back to the Wednesday Project. I'm Christina, and I'm glad that you're here. Last week, we talked about Elijah, about what it looks like when a body reaches its limit, about the quiet wisdom in the words, "It is enough." And I've been sitting with a question since then. I think there's a natural next step that doesn't always get named. Elijah rested, he ate, he slept, and then he got up. He returned. And so today, I want to ask what that actually looks like. Not just the resting, not just the honoring of limits, but what comes after. What does it mean to step back without disappearing? What does faithful withdrawal actually look like? And how do we return? Not with shame, not with explanation, not with apology, but with capacity. Today's episode is about rhythm, engagement, withdrawal, and return. Not collapse, not escape, not burnout, rhythm. There is a line in the Gospels that repeats more than we notice. Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Luke tells us this, almost as an aside, like it's just a thing Jesus did. But I want to slow that down because I think the pattern matters. After crowds, he withdrew. After miracles, he withdrew. Before decisions, he withdrew. Before suffering, he withdrew. And then he returned. Every time. Now, here's what I find so striking about this. Jesus was not withholding out of fear. He was not avoiding the crowds because they were too much for him. He was not running from his calling. He was pacing himself within it. Withdrawal was not abandonment. It was rhythm. It was part of the pattern of how he lived out his ministry, not in spite of his humanity, but through it. And I want to offer you one simple observation before we go any further. Even Jesus did not remain constantly available, not to the disciples, not to the crowds, not even, it seems, to the demands of what he knew was coming. He withdrew, he returned. That was the rhythm. I want to talk about something very simply and without a lot of clinical language, because I think we sometimes overcomplicate what is actually a very basic truth about how human beings work. The body cannot remain mobilized indefinitely. It was not designed to. Constant output, relationally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, depletes something. And when we keep asking for output without building in recovery, clarity suffers. Discernment blurs. The ability to hear gets crowded out by the noise of just keeping up. I don't think this is controversial. I think most of us already know this is true. We've felt it. The moment when patience runs out, not because the situation changed, but because we did. We got thin. We got depleted. And what came out of us was not what we would have chosen if we had more to give. There was a word I use in the therapy room that I want to offer you here. Resourced. When someone is resourced, they have something to draw from. Internal capacity. The ability to respond rather than just react. The space to make a considered choice rather than a desperate one. Withdrawal is how we rebuild that. not by escaping life, but by stepping back just long enough to replenish what we cannot give from empty. I want to be careful here because I know some of you are listening and wondering, but how do I know if what I'm calling withdrawal isn't actually just avoidance? That's a fair question, and it's actually a wise one. And I want to answer it as simply and honestly as I can. Avoidance is reactive. It says, this is too uncomfortable and I need it to stop. It cuts relationship. It doesn't return. Or if it returns without having gained anything. Just the same situation with the same amount of dread that it started with. Withdrawal is different. Withdrawal is intentional. It is chosen rather than compelled. It is time-bound, meaning there is a sense, even if it's not a specific date, that this stepping back is for something. For recovery, for clarity, for the capacity to return with more to offer. Withdrawal doesn't sever the relationship. It protects it. Here's a way I sometimes think about it. Avoidance is about getting away from something. Withdrawal is about getting back to yourself so that you can come back to it. And yes, there will be gray areas. There will be moments when you genuinely don't know which one it is. That's okay. That question is worth sitting with. What I'd offer is this. If the stepping back feels like relief that opens something, that's probably withdrawal. If the stepping back just feels like relief and then nothing changes, that might be worth looking at more closely. I'd like to talk about what actually happens when we step back well. Because I think sometimes withdrawal gets a bad reputation as something passive, like you're just waiting, just doing nothing. But withdrawal, when it's intentional, is actually quite active. Not in a busy sense, but in the sense that something is happening, even when you're still. Capacity rebuilds. The emotional intensity that felt overwhelming begins to settle. Clarity, which had gotten murky under the pressure of constant engagement, starts to sharpen again. The things that felt tangled begin to sort themselves out without you having to force them. And discernment, the ability to tell what's actually true from what just feels urgent, well, discernment strengthens. I think of it sometimes like a glass of water that's been stirred. When you keep stirring, everything is suspended. You can't see clearly through all that movement. But when you set it down and leave it alone for a while, things settle. The water clarifies, and you can see again. That's what withdrawal makes room for. Not passivity, settlement. The natural, necessary work of a nervous system and a soul doing what they were designed to do when we give them space to do it. This is the part I want to slow down for. Because I think for a lot of us, the hardest part is not the stepping back. It's the returning. There's a voice, and I suspect you know the one I mean, that says you need to explain yourself. That says you owe people an account of where you went or why you were gone. That says the stepping back was somehow a failure that requires justification. I want to gently push back on that. Withdrawal is not something you have to earn your way back from. You don't have to reestablish your credibility. You don't have to compensate for the time you took. You don't have to re-enter with an apology for having needed what you needed. You return when you are resourced. That's it. And here's the theological piece I want to hold out to you. Withdrawal is not the opposite of faithfulness. It is part of it. Because you cannot give what you do not have. And you cannot sustain what you never replenish. The God who withdrew to lonely places did not ask you to live without breath. The pattern he embodied was not a pattern of relentlessness. It was a pattern of rhythm, engagement, withdrawal, return. Not as failure, not as weakness, but as the shape of a life that can keep going. So as you head back into your week, I want to leave you with this simple frame. Not a rule, not an assignment, just a way of seeing. There is a rhythm available to you. Engagement, withdrawal, return. It is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that you are paying attention. You don't have to stay mobilized to stay faithful. You don't have to override your humanity to follow God. And you don't have to earn your way back to a place you never actually left. The goal isn't to stop engaging. The goal is to engage from a place that has something to give. And that requires the rhythm. So this week, be someone who steps back without disappearing. Be someone who returns without apology. Be someone who trusts that the rhythm is not failure. It is faithfulness taking a different shape. Until next Wednesday, may you rest without guilt, return without shame, and trust that the God who made you for rhythm as much as for faithfulness.